Hi, I'm Jill Gambaro, the author of The Truth About Carpal Tunnel Syndrome, the #1 occupational illness in the United States and the #1 cause of physical disability in the world. Carpal tunnel syndrome was called an epidemic in the 1990s when personal computers started appearing at the workplace. Now, nearly 30 years later, while incidents have decreased, the costs have actually gone up. Europe and the emerging world is seeing an epidemic of their own. And when today's texting teens enter the workforce, experts predict a tsunami of injuries. Small businesses are particularly susceptible, as even one injury could devastate a small enterprise. Yet crucial information has yet to trickle down, largely because of the logistics. So I made this podcast to help out the little guys. It contains the latest in prevention and treatment, but I also show you how to turn this problem into an economic engine in your company. At the end, I show you how to use these tools to increase the value of your company and add to your bottom line. Now, I know you're busy, so I've added all the data and resources I use to my website so you can download them. You can just sit back and listen. You don't have to take notes. You can also come back and re-listen to a section later just to refresh yourself. Also, at the end, I'll give you my email, so if you have any questions, just drop me a line. If you have success stories that you'd like to share, please drop me a line too. I really believe in crowdsourcing as a way to solve this problem. Carpal tunnel syndrome, what every small business needs to know. The most important thing you need to know about carpal tunnel syndrome as a small business owner is that every job in your company requires the use of hands, including yours. There's a lot of fallacies about carpal tunnel syndrome in the workplace, that it's an injury, that an ergonomics workstation will fix it, that it's only in the wrist or elbow or shoulder or neck, the best treatment is surgery, and that most injured workers are faking it. Statistically, carpal tunnel syndrome is reported at between 15 and 27%, but that's just carpal tunnel. There are actually over 100 repetitive strain injuries. Gamer's thumb is different, tennis elbow is different. No one's tracking RSI's repetitive strain injuries in total. They only track by the body part, or what they call musculoskeletal disorders. And they also leave out back injuries as a result of repetitive movements. So this data isn't accurate. They're known in the healthcare industry for being underreported. They were an epidemic in the 80s and 90s. No one's using that word to describe them now, even though the costs have continued to rise despite incidents having been reduced, which tells me that they're getting more expensive, not less. Two factors, I believe, will impact the prevalence of RSIs over the next 5 years. First, tablet PCs, laptops, and smartphones undo all the positive advancements in ergonomics made with desktop computers. The jury is still out whether tablets can be used without injury, but laptops, the mouse, and smartphones absolutely cannot be used without injury. And today's teenagers are already using technology 50% more than the heaviest computer users at work during the so-called epidemic. So I expect, with the increase in numbers, that we're going to see 40%. I've taken the 27% number of carpal tunnel cases, and that's annually, by the way, and multiplied it by another 50%, we could be looking at a 40% prevalence over the next 5 years. No one knows the exact cost of RSIs because, again, it's not being tracked, but the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons says that it costs $850 billion a year in the United States alone. It disproportionately affects small businesses because of the expense involved in not only losing the employee, but losing downtime. Even replacing that injured employee is 200% of their annual salary. In California, carpal tunnel syndrome results in 3 times the rate of permanent disability than any other occupational injury or illness. Carpal tunnel syndrome represents 60% of all occupational injuries. And one protracted case can cost $1 million. Business, it can devastate a small business. I will show you how to do a cost benefit so you can get a better idea of what this does for you and your company. But don't look at the cost benefit analysis based on the injuries you already have. Instead, you have to try to predict the injuries that will happen. By the end of this presentation, you'll have a number of factors to work from. And on my website, under the resources tab, I'll have a document with all the statistical data I present here so that you can draw from that data. There's also a spreadsheet with a whole list of factors to include in your analysis. Since each company and each industry is different, if you find something that I've not included, please share. Again, I really believe in crowdsourcing. What is true about carpal tunnel syndrome is hotly debated. Medical science does not agree on causation or treatments. Let's call them repetitive strain injuries, or RSIs, and I'll explain why in a minute. RSIs are absolutely preventable, but they require partnership. If you treat your employees like assets, they will be assets. And if you treat them like liabilities, they'll be liabilities. But the employee-employer partnership is not the only one with this. You can partner with your workers' compensation insurance carrier as well to develop the programs that I talk about here. A little bit about me, so you know where my experience comes from. I was a legal secretary when I got injured in Beverly Hills, which meant that I commanded quite a high salary. My diagnosis is bilateral carpal tunnel syndrome, and the bilateral is both hands. Bilateral radial tunnel syndrome, which is in the elbows. Bilateral thoracic outlet syndrome, which is basically behind the shoulder blades. And then an annular fissure at L5-S1, which is the last disc in my back. So you can see that my injury was across my entire upper body. Multiple RSIs like this are called a double crush. I've been living with these injuries for 15 years. I've to stay on top of them to keep from getting flare-ups, and I still cannot sit at a desk. I'm told I'm a rare case, both in the extent of my injuries and the progress of my rehabilitation. I'm a former board member of the Los Angeles Repetitive Strain Injury Support Group and the Cumulative Trauma Disorders Resources Network, where I have regularly worked with RSI patients, the healthcare community, and political organizations. I advocate patient engagement and employee engagement as prevention and productivity models for solving this problem. I'm also an independent film producer, and come to find out that makes a big difference. Movies are very complex tasks that have to be accomplished across large teams with varying disciplines on very tight budgets and very tight schedules. Entertainment is a talent-driven business, and an independent producer must be able to identify, engage, and retain talent. It's crucial. I've had to purchase work comp policies, oversee safety programs on set, which is also complex, and manage a high level of productivity. I'm a small business owner myself, so when I got injured, I saw immediately how poorly the system was handling these injuries and how simple it would be to fix that. I draw on all of this in making this presentation and my recommendations. Now let's look at repetitive strain injuries. What is an RSI? Let's go back to what I said earlier about RSIs not being an injury. They act more like an illness in that they're systemic. Forget my crude construction here, I'm bootstrapping this, but I wanted to show you how that happens so you can understand how absolutely critical it is to apply the most effective treatments as soon as possible in order to prevent the really bad injury. Okay, let's start this video here. Okay, so you think it's all in the wrist, but it's not. It starts in the wrist, but when we look a little bit closer at the anatomy of the wrist, we'll see some of the issues. You can see here that what's in the hand is very complex. Tendons, ligaments, bones, joints, muscles, nerves. It's all very complicated, and it all works very together like a seed. And it's not just in the wrist, it goes all the way up the arm. And here's the green is the nerves here, and there is all the blood vessels. They all work together. When they get to this picture here, this is the thoracic outlet that I described earlier that I have. All of the tendons and ligaments and muscles and blood vessels and nerves from the arm, that very complicated system from the hand and the arm, all comes together into a very narrow tunnel just under the shoulder girdle. there. It's called the thoracic outlet. And when one or more of those structures are even just the slightest bit swollen, it swells everything up and it causes big. Here is a MRI image that shows you everything, and you can see where things are labeled. This is a better picture of it. This is how narrow the tunnel is where the nerves pass through. So there just is not a lot of room. And when nerves are compromised, the signals get lost. They're not doing their job. They're not communicating. And here is a map of all the blood vessels in the upper body. So that's how far it can affect everything. And all these little arrows here are all the different sites where a repetitive strain injury, it's kind of ground zero for each one. So as you can see, this is a very complex system, and they don't operate in a vacuum. One operates against the other, operates against the other. That's how, for me, it went from my hands to my elbows into my... The longer it takes to get the proper treatment, the worse these things become. It's a race against the clock. And by the time you feel pain, your musculature is already affected. Numbness and tingling indicates nerve damage, and sometimes the nerve damage is permanent. If it's not addressed quickly and correctly, it can be permanent, as in my case. Coldness or heaviness, loss of circulation, these are all symptoms, and there's many end-stage complications once you get into a very serious version of a repetitive strain injury, largely due to chronic pain. It winds up affecting your entire system. Unfortunately, the workers' compensation system's current tactics in dealing with RSIs are often to delay and deny treatment, which for an RSI is the absolute worst thing you can do. As an employer, this is something that you can absolutely control. Make sure your employees are receiving the proper treatment as quickly as possible for a higher return. In advance, find practitioners in your area who have demonstrated a success of treating repetitive. Specific strategies for finding a good practitioner for patients are in my book, and I would advise employers to take the same approach. Work with these practitioners to set up a prevention program, which I'll talk about in a minute, but make sure they've treated a lot of RSIs in the past. Many healthcare practitioners will tell you, oh yeah, I know how to treat carpal tunnel syndrome. When it turns out that they don't, because there's a lot of misinformation, even in the medical community. So make sure that they can demonstrate successful return to work for RSI patients. Also, they should be able to provide you with some outcome data on that. Don't just take their word for it. Because statistically, 50% of workers injured with RSIs don't return to their original position. And as a small business owner, that's something that you can ill afford. Treatment is still in the forefront of medical science. This is very important that you know that. There's a lot of controversy. Many practitioners, again, will tell you that they know how to treat RSIs when really they don't. Some physical therapists are amazing and others. Let's start with a prevention program. What constitutes an effective prevention program? Some things you should know before embarking on setting up a prevention and treatment program. First is that your workers' compensation insurance carrier can provide help. In California, they are mandated to provide that help to their policyholders. It varies from state to state, but I would be very surprised if you called your work comp insurance carrier and asked for help and they didn't have any programs in place. And if they do, please send them to me because I'm happy to work with them to develop some. Liberty Mutual, which is the largest work comp insurance carrier in the United States, did a study and found that education alone was not a good prevention program. In other words, just getting an ergonomic workstation alone is not going to be enough. You have to also train your employees, use the technology correctly. Studies from the insurance carriers show that when they come into a company and implement a prevention program or an ergonomics program, there's you. So what may motivate you to contact your carrier and try and implement one of these programs in the first place might be that nobody in your shop has an injury or is experiencing pain, or that there's only one person. But as soon as you get anyone official in here to start to do an assessment, other people are going to report pain. The insurance carriers call that a bounce, but they consider that those injuries would have occurred anyway, and you're actually getting in earlier. Awareness is really the point. Ergonomics is not just about keyboard height. There's a lot involved in ergonomics, and there's a very good description of it on OSHA's website. And again, that's in the reference materials on my website. Ergonomics also includes how the tool fits the user, how the user fits the tool, how the job fits the employee, how the employee fits the job, and a number of other factors like temperature and climate. Job stress is a really big one also. Causation. It starts with posture. Science doesn't know exactly what causes RSIs. One worker will get it and another won't when they're doing the same job, or two workers can get it doing, and the symptoms won't be the same, or the treatments they respond to won't be the same. One will get better and the other one won't. They just don't have a lot of epidemiology on this. The only known corollary is posture, poor posture. Remember the video I showed you earlier about the thoracic outlet and how tightly everything was compacted in there? Well, that thoracic outlet in this person is right under the hunch of his shoulders. And when your shoulders are hunched like that in that very small cavity, it compromises it even more, so there's even less room. So you can look around your employees and think that anybody who has poor posture, including yourself, is going to be more susceptible to a repetitive strain injury, and you would be absolutely correct. Unfortunately, posture is not that easy to fix. There's a lot of psychosocial factors. It ties so much into body language and stress and self-esteem that it's just not that easy to fix. Also compromised by a sedentary lifestyle, and someone who exercises regularly can also have poor posture and still get an RSI because here's another one is not going to be effective. You have to have a comprehensive assessment, but it doesn't have. This formula is a good basis for beginning to analyze how much your employees are exposed to a repetitive equals the insult to tissues. This formula was developed by a chiropractor by the name of Dr. P. Michael Leahy in Colorado, and his work with repetitive strain injuries has been so successful it was as a OSHA approved treatment strategy. One of the things that you have to look at here in terms of force and tension and relaxation is type A personalities or job stress. We noticed at the Los Angeles Repetitive Strain Injury Support Group that all of us were type A personalities, which means that we were the hardest working people in the shop, contrary to most work-related injuries where the idea is that employees are faking it because they're lazy. People who get repetitive motion injuries are actually the ones that are working the hardest for you. And here we get to job stress. Job stress is an interesting thing. It's the elephant in the room, and the business has not wanted to deal with it because there's the idea that lower job stress means that you're not going to meet your financial goals, and that's absolutely not true. I think developed this model where through their research where they realized that job stress really comes down to how much latitude the employee has in deciding how to complete their job and what tools to use, how much management support they have a factor. Again, OSHA has a really good page on their website about this, and that's in the reference materials in my website. And I'm going to show you a little later on where you can actually use this model to add value to your company via intellectual knowledge. Hiring an ergonomist. Well, if you're a small shop, you just may not have the money for it. And if everybody's just sitting at a desk typing and using cell phones, you may not need it. I think it's best to do a self-assessment before you bring in an expert, because you have to know what you need. One size does not fit all. If everyone in your company is performing the same task, chances are there's something on the internet that can help you address this. But if you have a complex production system in your business, then you're going to want somebody that has a very particular specialty. Some ergonomists work in a firm that has a broader knowledge base. Others are solo practitioners or specialists. Some people who are really effective at solving ergonomics problems in the workplace aren't actually ergonomists at all. They come from another background, another bit of training. Some have degrees in ergonomics, and they're going to bring all this knowledge to bear, and you have to know what you need. So if you're, say, an auto repair shop, and your employees are often in very complex positions doing odd movements, and it's really hurting them, on the one hand, I think you're going to need somebody that has a lot of science behind their ergonomics training, that, as you can see from this image, they have measured how much room the arm can go up and down and all that. On the other hand, your employees are also have engineering backgrounds, they have engineering minds, and they could probably come up with a lot of the solutions themselves. In my book, I tell a story from ergonomist's experience that really points to that, and I think it's very good. Your problem solving may require a different specialty entirely. And the other thing I want to say about ergonomists or bringing in an ergonomist is just to be careful. Anybody who's trying to sell you gadgets, the ergonomic gadgets tend to help some, but not everyone, and it's hard to rely on them. I know, there's a lot of really good mouse on the market. There's a lot of good keyboards on the market. For instance, the Wave keyboard helps some people. The Wave keyboard helps me, or used to help me, but it doesn't work for everyone. So just be careful about somebody who's pushing gadgets. This is really important. When you decide that you're going to embark on a prevention program, you have a responsibility in this. And the number one complaint of ergonomics is that the ergonomists is that employees only want to take a pill or have surgery. They don't want to make any lifestyle changes, and the employers don't want to disrupt their business. And unfortunately, if you're going to institute an effective prevention program, both of these things are going to happen. Your employees, including yourself, are going to have to make lifestyle changes, and you're going to have to tweak your business processes, but in the end, it is extremely valuable to have done so. It's not a hands-off process for management. You have to be ready, willing, and able to make the changes, and you have to discuss this before you engage your ergonomist, so you know or are very clear what everybody can expect from this process. Oftentimes what winds up happening is that you have to rethink processes within the company. I know one of the big problems with manufacturing is the assembly line job structure. And it doesn't matter if you move them from the widget A station to the widget B station. If they're still moving their left hand in a very specific way all day long, it's a problem. So you have to rethink a lot of processes. It can affect your entire company, and it can cause delays in time, money, and resources. So this goes back to the cost-benefit analysis. You have to really understand how much you're risking by not doing this. And the other thing I want to say about any prevention program is that who you choose to be the point person is extremely important. They should be a strong leader. They should understand as many jobs as possible in the system. They should be able to keep everyone's eyes on the prize and be able to interface with management. I would not put the employer as the point person. Work redesign, as I said, is really what is at the heart of these injuries, and it is the most difficult adjustment, from reorganizing tasks to completely redesigning every process within a company. It's undoubtedly difficult for everyone involved. Human beings don't like change. It's scary. This is especially a challenge for the team leader who you pick, but the rewards are tremendous. And I will get to that a little bit later. So when I said that the workers' compensation system handles detail, I'm in California that RSI, injured workers with RSI are 3 times more likely to wind up with a permanent disability. As far as I'm concerned, that's we were just talking about a prevention program, but there is something between prevention and when your employee gets injured. It's kind of a loophole, if you will, in OSHA's standards that you can apply first aid and not have to file an injured worker report. And with a repetitive strain injury, first aid is really effective. Remember the gentleman I told you, the chiropractor in Colorado who developed that equation for calculating the amount of insult to tissues for repetitive strain injuries? He developed something called active release technique. And it's mostly the practitioners who is doing. It has to do with releasing the chronic tension in the muscles. The important part is that OSHA has officially approved this education modality that, again, you can use before you have to, when your employees first experience pain, you can send them off to an active release therapist in your area, and it is considered first aid, and you don't have to file any kind of reports with OSHA. Yoga instructors can, in a way, provide first aid, provided, again, that you find a yoga instructor that has successfully treated repetitive strain injuries. Massage therapists, the same thing. Also, first aid can be exercise or meditation. This is kind of on that bridge between the prevention program and first aid. If you have your employees regularly exercising under somebody that understands how to treat these injuries, it can go a very long way to not only prevent them, but also when they first start feeling pain, to reverse that pain quickly. And you really have to head these things off at the pass. But I cannot emphasize enough that you have to make sure that whatever practitioner you work with can demonstrate a statistical history of success in treating repetitive strain injury. What not to do when an employee says they're feeling pain. Case management is really where so many repetitive strain injuries go wrong. And that's because of the prevailing defensive posture within the workers' compensation insurance system. Causation is a legal issue automatically with RSI, and it's going to get only worse when today's texting teens join the workforce because they've been texting and playing video games for years, and they also go home after work and do the same thing. And this is going to affect how much legally the cause of that injury is from work. For instance, if you have an employee that plays drums in a heavy metal band on the weekends, that's, you need, but accidents happen and people get injured. And believe me, nobody who has gotten a repetitive strain injury wanted to get it once they understood what it was. They may have been lazy or had poor lifestyle habits beforehand, but once you feel that level of pain, and especially the nerve pain, it's tremendous, and it greatly affects your body and permanently affects your body. Nobody wants to be in that situation. Effective case management strategies are to ensure that the accident is reported and documented correctly, but you already know that. But make sure your employee gets the medical attention they need, and that's going to be effective. And here's where finding that practitioner in advance who has successfully treated these injuries is going to be a big help, because it's really a matter of heading. The other thing statistically is that injured workers who feel cared for by their employers have much better return to work outcomes. And again, this defensive posture that the work comp industry has taken on injuries really is don't rush to deny the injury. It only delays treatment. If your work comp system in your state, like New York, they automatically, RSIs automatically go into a litigation system, and it's 6 months before that is resolved. You cannot let your employee not get treatment for 6 months. Only to take the stance that your worker is faking it is really going to cost you a lot of money in this. The National Institutes of Science says that only 10% of work comp claims are fraudulent. Now that you're educated, you're in a better position to assess whether or not your employee is really injured. And the earlier the intervention, the better the return to work outcomes. So let's go to a return to work program. The biggest return to work barrier is nervousness on the part of the injured worker. And the psychological aspects of these injuries are just undeniable. You can't dismiss them. It makes sense that if you hurt yourself and put yourself in a lot of pain from doing something, you just don't want to do it again. When you get into a car accident and you suffer tremendous injuries, it's a while before you feel comfortable behind the wheel again. This is equally true for anyone who's been injured at work, whether you think it's their, quote, their fault or not. And it's most definitely a factor. The second factor is impatience on the part of employers. Let's go back to that practitioner you're going to select in advance. Not only do you want to ask them what their success rate is in treating RSI patients, you also want to ask them if they have any return to work philosophies in place in advance. This goes to employee engagement. From the minute your employees get hired, it should be made very clear to them that if they get injured on the job, they're going to be taken care of, but they are expected to return to work, and that the company is going to be very proactive in helping them to do that, because nobody wants to be out of work. We may think we want to be out of work, but when you're really out of work, you don't want to be out of work. And it's more than just about money. It's also about self-esteem issues. So any return to work program should be only when they're medically approved by their doctor. And I would put into place several transition phases. So, you know, it's the whole thing about light duty, right? Give them opportunities to try to be heavier tasks. And also give them the opportunity that if it's not working, that they can back off a little bit and go back to a lighter duty. But outline this to your employee really from when they get injured, and make sure that all your employees understand that you're going to work this comprehensively and closely with them when they do get injured. And make sure that the entire shop understands that this is how you're working with the injured employee, because the employer is not going to be the only one who's impatient. The person who has to take up their slack is going to be impatient too. So if they know that everybody is on board with getting this person back to work, it's going to go much more smoothly. And let's talk about light duty. Statistics show gainful employment provides a tremendous emotional boost for everyone. Again, let all your employees know that you will work with them to get them back to work as soon as medically advisable, but it's a delicate dance. And the more you can do with light duty, the better this is going to work for you. Light duty doesn't have to mean light productivity. It has to do with not giving them duties that tax them physically in a way that increases their injury. There's a lot of things that can be done in a company that gets around that. The whole point of giving the employee light duty is to empower them. Don't focus on what they can't do, but focus on what they can do as a way to help them get back to work. And I'm going to say you're going to have to get creative with light duty. Let's go back to that heavy metal drummer on the weekend. She's likely to think very different than the rest of your employees, because creative people do. So get other members of your team on board with coming up with what consists of light duty that this injured employee can do that empowers them rather than taxes the entire company. You have to apply a different way of thinking to this. Einstein said you can't solve a problem with the same mind that created it. So you need a different mind. Find somebody in your team that thinks a little bit differently. The other thing I want to say about the mind is that when it comes to an injured worker, there's nothing wrong with their mind unless they're in a lot of chronic pain. So tap their intellectual abilities. Remember I said that the number one problem for ergonomists is that the employees want to just take a pill or get surgery and that's it. They don't want to make lifestyle changes. So yes, you're going to have some issues enlisting your employees into this program that you put together. Start with, again, how much is it worth to you? What is your risk? How many of your employees are susceptible to repetitive strain injuries? And I would say probably all of them. Multiply that by 15%. Add in the lost time costs, the lost opportunity costs, the loss of quality costs, the turnover costs, the time the employee is not at work, the replacement costs. If you have to replace one employee, it's 200% of their annual salary is the cost to your company. And what if that employee is the only expert in a key system in your company? Replacing them is going to cost you a lot more. Now you have an idea for how much it's going to cost you to implement the program and how much it will cost you not to implement the program. Privately insured companies that, like most small businesses that buy workers' compensation insurance policies, have significantly worse outcomes in repetitive strain injuries than companies that can afford to insure themselves against injury. We don't have any statistics on that exactly, but I can tell you that since 1962, the number of self-insured companies has doubled. The other thing you have to factor in doing cost-benefit analysis is that your work comp premium will go up and you will have OSHA penalties. So my strategy for enlisting employees into the program is really you've got to enlist yourself first. Once you realize how much it's costing you not to do this, then you can begin to address your employees. And engaging them is all about engaging their intellectual capital. Valuing intellectual capital within a company is a challenge. And you can enlist your accounting department or your accountant to do this for you. It is the convince you to embark on any of these programs, especially if you'd like to sell your business at some point. Intellectual capital is the collective knowledge of your company and your team. Problem-solving skills and business contacts are easier to value than, say, coping skills. But coping skills on a film set is a huge asset to the production. When you calculate these, they add to your balance sheet as an asset. The Wyatt consulting firm in 2000 conducted a study that showed that significantly improving human capital practices can create a 30% increase in stockholder value. That's tremendous, again, especially if you're going to try and sell your business. And I go back to that only one person in your shop who knows how to do a key process. It may only be making the coffee, but how valuable is the person who can make the coffee? First time they're out sick, it'll tell you. What happens that day tells you how valuable they are. Traditional sources of intellectual capital include intellectual property, patents and copyrights, databases, general business methods, research and development, firm-specific and task-specific knowledge and practices of managers and workers. These are their economic competencies. But there are other sources of productivity too: decision-making skills, opportunity identifying skills, coping skills, innovation skills, harmonizing skills. And I have a picture here of Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young to remind you what the ability to harmonize does for a group. When you start to harness the intellectual capital of your company to solve some of the ergonomics problems and job stress problems and process problems that will happen when you set up a prevention program, you're going to see a tremendous amount of increased productivity because you'll find tremendous improvements in production processes, decision-making and governance processes. This is a new way to measure productivity. There's a researcher by the name of Robert Karasik who said you can't measure productivity accurately if you're only looking at output or profit. Instead, you have to look at future economic development. Now, when Karasik came out with that theory, I think it was in the 60s or 70s, the problem was that how are you going to constantly intellectually challenge your employees? Well, business climate today provides the solution for that because with all the technology, rapid adaptation is just a fact of life, but it also means continually growing the skills and capabilities of your workers. This continually increases the conducive value of output of your company. Prevention and intervention programs can be a good first experiment in this. So let's go back to the story of the auto workers that I tell in the book. They had a problem installing a certain common item under a dashboard because they had to torque themselves in such a way as to actually remove the part and put a new one in. But together they came up with a way to solve that problem. And not only does it prevent injuries in their employees, it sped up the amount of time it took to perform that task. So their company was making more money off of those jobs than it had before. The best way to figure out how to improve a system is by asking the people who use the system every day. They call this participatory ergonomics, and it's the cheapest avenue available. And it's also one that can launch a knowledge productivity program that, again, can increase the value of your business by 30%. Engagement. It means everybody is working on everything all the time. It's just like user engagement that they talk about in social media, and then they become advocates. So make your employees feel like owners. Give them a stake in how successful the company is. Doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a financial stake. Your reward structure can be non-financial. But gaining the cooperation of your employees in these programs is essential. You just won't get good results without them. So to recap, you're building a prevention program, intervention program, return to work program, and knowledge productivity program. And yes, it's complicated, but they work together and one will feed into the other. Once you raise your employees' awareness of the dangers of repetitive strain injuries and what their exposure is and what it can do to them, they're going to be very motivated to follow a prevention program. And then when you can start to improve the processes and the productivity of the company, they just buy in from the beginning. It's organic. Make sure the ergonomist is working with you on all 4 levels for maximum benefit for your company. If you do this right, again, you will add capital value to your company. You'll build future growth into everyday practices. It is powerful, powerful stuff. It increases your own economic competency, which you can leverage. Conducting your own cost-benefit analysis. This is my website, truthaboutcarpaltunnel.com. You can click on the resources tab. There's a spreadsheet of data. There's my email address, truthaboutcarpaltunnel@yahoo.com. I go into each of these topics in far greater detail in my book. I also blog at Blogspot, which is the 3rd one down, and LinkedIn regularly. And on Facebook, I provide a lot of recent research on the topic. Just through my platform. And I'd like to hear from you about your successes and misses because that's how we learn. And I can always introduce you to people. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you found some information useful. I'll leave the podcast up for a while so you can come back and listen to it anytime you want or use it as reference. Don't forget to like and share. Bye-bye.